In the previous video, we began creating the dialog tree. In this video, we'll continue that work. Let's begin by writing the king's start or find spell node. So we'll go to the node button and make a new node, and we'll name it king.start or find spell. I'm going to leave the node as empty for now because watch what happens when we exit. There's now a line being drawn from the king node to the king.startOrFindSpell node because Yarn is able to see the connection that says, there's a king.startOrFindSpell link here, so I'll draw the line. You can pan around the Yarn view by holding down the Option and Command keys on the Mac or Control and Alt keys on Windows, so just to rearrange the view. Let's open up king.startOrFindSpell. The way this is structured is the very first time we speak to the king, when the king is in this state, we get a huge amount of information saying, okay, here's the situation, the wizard, the gold, go and sort it out. But if we then speak to the king a second time, while the king is still in this state, we want to have a slightly more condensed version. So what we'll do is we'll have a variable called king talk. Just as we had with the fountain, we had fountain talk, we'll have king talk that keeps track of how many times we've spoken to the king. Additionally, if this is the first time we have run this node, we'll reset king talk to 0. We can use a function called visited, which Yarn provides, that allows us to check to see if we've ever run this node before. First, we'll check to see if we've ever run this node by saying if visited king.start or find spell. So if that's false, we'll set king talk to 0. We're going to reset a counter. And if king talk is equal to 0, then we'll run some dialogue. The king will start by saying, help, my wizard's an idiot. Remember that the king can run this node in either the start or the find spell stage. We're in the find spell stage if we have spoken to either of these characters and we've learned that we need to find a spell. If game state is equal to find spell, then we can have the player kind of react and say, player, I know what happened. Doing little things like this can help the player feel like the game is reacting to them much more closely. So we can now explain to the character. King says, she was trying to turn wood into gold to solve our economic crisis. It's good to break this up into multiple lines. And she accidentally turned herself into gold. So we have a call to action for the player, can you help? This is a good point for the player to have some kind of interaction. Even if it's meaningless to the story, the player must always say, all right, I'll help. It's always good to give the player something to do. If you have a player sitting there watching text scroll past, they'll rapidly get bored. But if you give them something to do, even if it's just choosing a way to say yes, then you've got them more interested. In Yarn, there are two different ways to provide options. The first is to create a list of options as well as the nodes that should be run if that option is selected. This is how you do most of your major branching in Yarn. Another way you can do it is with a thing called a shortcut option. A shortcut option is a dash and then a greater than symbol. Then the text of the option. So we can say, I guess? And then if you indent by pressing the tab key, the lines that appear that are indented will be run only if the player chose this option. So we can say, king, thank you, there's no pay. Or we could have a different option. She turned herself into gold. Now this should only appear if we don't already know that. We haven't gone and spoken to the wizard before. We can add a condition on this shortcut option by saying, if game state is not find spell. So this will only appear if the game state is not find spell. Then we'll have the king say, she's never done anything like this before. And we have another line as well, so it doesn't have to be a single line. We have multiple lines that run as a result of choosing this option. So there's our line, and then we'll also have one more as well, because we might be speaking to the king after we spoke to the wizard. So if we are in the find spell stage, after the king says, can you help, we'll be able to say, yes, I already am. So we say, I'm looking for a spell reversal spell, but only if game state is equal to find spell. The king should reply, oh, that's great. That'll be really useful. I didn't even know those existed. This all runs if we are in the start or find spell stage and we have not yet spoken to the king. However, if this is the second time we've spoken to the king, then we should have the king say something different. Else if king talk is equal to 1, then we'll have the king say something different. We'll say, king, I'm not sure what to do. Maybe there's a clue to fixing it near her house. Bit of a clue to the player there. Else, so if it's anything else, king will say, please help. Just a really short thing. If it's a short line, that can really help the player realize, oh, okay, we've reached the end of this. Then end if. Finally, the very last thing to do will be to increment the king talk variable so that every time we speak to the king when they're in this state, then it goes up by 1. Set king talk plus equals 1. All right, we're now all done with our king start or find spell node. Let's save this and test it in the game. So we hit the play button. We have a compiler error. So Yarn says error passing node wizard on line 14, expected a statement, but got an end of input instead. Let's try and debug this. So in wizard, we had 2 if statements here. Save that one more time. Go back into Unity, play button, walk over to the king and have a chat. That's what we expected. Help, my wizard's an idiot. She's trying to turn wood into gold. And she accidentally turned herself into gold. Can you help? Then we get the options. There's 2 of them because there are 2 options that are presented. There's I guess and she turned herself into gold. That only appears because we're not in the find spell state. So we'll go I guess. Nothing happens because we have not yet connected our buttons to the dialog. Let's fix that by going to our dialog canvas, going to the container, going to the buttons container, and then looking at the buttons. Notice the button script has an on click. Let's select all of them and then click on the plus button in the on click. We'll drag the dialog object into the slot and we'll change our function to dialog UI set option. Option 0 is the first option, option 1 is the second option, and so on. Right now, they're all set to say, okay, when clicked, choose option 0. We have to change that, so we'll go to option 2 and set that to be 1. Option 3, set that to 2. 4, set that to 4. Give it a run. Walk over to the king. Tap talk. There's our dialogue. There we go. We now have branching narrative in our game. In the next video, we'll continue implementing our story, adding in support for multiple states as well as the wizard.